Before she'd taken up her position earlier in the night, Nora had tested the floorboards of the barracks. She'd discovered precisely where and how to step to nullify any squeaky planks. Like all the other rooms in the barracks, this door was adorned with an intricate inlay of a hawk's head with ruby eyes and a gilded beak. She fished a flat sliver of polished steel from her cloak, along with a vial of cactus oil. Nora put her ear to the door. She listened, and heard only silence. Quietly, she popped the corkscrew from the vial, lathered the thin metal sliver, and proceeded to slip the tool between the door and threshold. Nora froze, petrified. Her ears rang with the hammering of her own heart. One of the first codes of assassins was to maintain control of the body and the mind, for if either go unbalanced, then the mission would fail. Heartbeats soon returned to normal, as did her breathing. She stepped into the dark room. She shut the door behind her. The blinds were pulled shut, allowing only thin slices of moonlight from the narrow sides of the window to penetrate the dark chamber. The moonlight glinted off a single throwing star set on the bedside table. Jordal's body could clearly be seen on the bed. A large bulky heap of flesh and muscle concealed by green wool covers. She padded closer, her steps silent. From her cloak she drew a small wooden dagger. Nora lifted her wooden dagger over her head, body rushing into hers. His hand curled around her neck, backing her into and against the wall. He smiled, his white teeth a stark contrast to the black of his skin in the darkness of the night. His cool breath wafted across her face like vapors from an elixir, his hard body a hair's width from hers. Nora jabbed a knee into his abdomen, but he caught it in his hand.
The girl is rash.
She ducked and slid beneath his wide-legged stance. As he turned to face her, she clocked him across the jaw.
Rash that.
Numbing pain vibrated through her hand into her wrist. He caught her fist midair. Nora backed up, ripped herself from his hold. Jordal stepped toward her.
What do you hope to achieve, dear girl?
Your respect when I defeat you.
With a wooden sword?
With a mighty heart.
Aye, you do have a mighty heart. I admire your ambition and choose to ignore your ridiculous antics.
Nora twirled, launching into a roundhouse kick. Easily, with a forearm, he blocked her assault. She twirled in the opposite direction, another roundhouse kick. He blocked.
You cannot defeat me.
Ha!
She walked up Jordal's bare chest, kicking him in the chin. Her feet went over her head. She turned into a backflip and landed squarely on her feet.
Impressive.
You talk too much.
His smile turned down. Jordal seemed lost in thought for a moment. He grabbed her forearm, twirling her to face the stone wall. Standing behind her, he pressed his body tight against hers. His hand palmed the back of her head, pressing her face against the stone. Her nose turned crooked, crushing under his force. A slight bone in the bridge of her nose crackled, threatening to break.
I could kill you, Nora.
A bead of sweat trickled down her cheek, over her top lip and salted her tongue.
Say it. Again.
Say what again? That I could kill you?
My name. I love the sound of it on your tongue.
Is the girl flirting?
If you have to ask, then I fear I am not flirting with any semblance of success.
The pressure of his body against hers alleviated as he stepped backward.
I changed my mind. I shall not kill you.
Nora smiled, still facing the wall.
Then whatever will you do with me?
Jordal's hands clutched at her hips.
I think I would rather bed you.
Only if you grant me access to your circle.
My sweet, sweet Nora. Do you think I value your virtue? You think me gentlemanlike?
Still standing behind her, Jordal circled an arm around her midsection. His hand slid up her torso, over her tunic. With a burst, he clutched her left breast and did so with not a hint of genteelness. Goosebumps riddled her arms. Nora felt him lean more firmly into her, his nose brushing across the sensitive skin on the nape of her neck.
We fight for the same god.
Aye, but the god I fight for knows the hunger of a man, for he was the one to gift this hunger to the man. He does not frown upon the man feeding this hunger.
Jordal nipped at her neck. She flinched at the unexpected painless and erotic sensation.
He takes what he hungers for and makes no apology for it.
Jordal's breath was no longer cool, but heavy with heat and promise.
Hear me, Nora, for if you truly wish to be a part of my circle, you must do so with a clear understanding.
Nora nodded, her face still pressed against the rutted wall.
Many on the outside respect the Order of Abel. As the original faction, this order has rightfully earned its place as the overseer of God's warriors.
But?
Jordal turned her to face him.
But other factions do not tie themselves to the ways of the ancients. Do you understand what I'm saying?
She nodded. Jordal shook his head.
A woman was built for a man's pleasure. The warriors of the Circle of Arc indulge in a woman's pleasure at his own will.
And what about her will?
The women in our circle find as much pleasure in a man as the warrior finds within her.
I don't want to be a woman you find pleasure in.
No?
I want to be the warrior you find pleasure in.
Nora watched his face. His expression was stoic, with a hint of confusion. Clearly, he did not anticipate her response. Nora allowed her tunic to fall to the floor, revealing a tight corset and leather shorts. And if his eyes weren't betrayal enough, the growing bulge in his leather trousers was the finishing blow. She unclasped the snaps on the front of her corset. The leather slipped from her body, revealing her small, round breasts. Nora put a hand on one breast and a hand on the other. She pinched her own nipples, hardening them. She looked up to find him staring, his mouth slightly parted. He licked his lips. He looked up from her chest to meet her gaze. A slow smile formed.
You think you are the first to seduce me? The first beautiful woman to offer herself up to me?
She mimicked his smile.
Beautiful, you say?
His hands still on her hips. His body pressed tight. Head tucked beside hers.
You can fuck me any which way you please, and until we are both winded and spent, but your body will not gain you access to the Circle of the Arc.
He leaned back to look at her.
Now get dressed. Run along and play nice with the other maidens.
Although he spoke the words with conviction, he had not moved his body away from hers. His heated gaze simply searched her face, as if he'd asked a question and was patiently waiting for the answer. Nora rose to her tiptoes and put her lips to Jordal's, and he did not dismiss her. Instead, he gripped her hips tighter, pulling her groin into his gyrating hips. He groaned into her open mouth. Nora suckled his bottom lip. He moaned his approval. Nora reached behind into the waist of her shorts and pulled out the throwing star she'd taken from his bedside table. She'd taken it right under his sleeping nose. Slowly, keeping her movements smooth and silent, she tucked the throwing star between his legs and pressed the teeth against his left inner thigh, inches from the bulge of leather covering his erect cock.
Is this reason enough?
She gave the star 3 controlled jabs until she felt the teeth tear through the leather and into his tender flesh.
To allow me entry?
Jordal's hands went to her head. He held her firmly as his mouth explored hers. Nora hadn't come to this warrior's chambers to bed him. She'd only wanted to prove herself as a viable contender and a proficient assassin. She could admit she needed formal training, but surely she'd proven herself as one with a natural fortitude for combat and a sharp mind for resourcefulness. This was the only goal for this night. She reminded herself of this fact, just as a trickle of moisture dripped from her sex. A tightness welled in her abdomen and a tingle vibrated at her core. His warm, large hands palmed her cheeks.
Take off your bottoms, my sweet Nora.
I,
she thought. Or had she spoken aloud? Her mind in a daze, she commanded her arms to move, fingers to unclasp, but she could not move. Was she frightened? No, she thought resignedly. She should be, but she wasn't. Nora wanted this warrior inside of her. Long fingers brushed against her abdomen, across her belly button and to the clasp of her shorts. A quick tug and she was naked, her shorts on the floor around her ankles. Those same warm fingers slid up her thigh. His large hand cupped her sex. Fingers curled into her moist folds. A long, deep moan growled into her ear, conjuring more juices to coat his fingers. Absently, Nora's hips ground against his hand. The hard pad of his thumb glided over her clitoris. Nora's eyes closed tight as she arched her back, thrusting her pelvis to consume more of his clawing fingers. His calloused digits plunged inside, caressing her moist inner walls. She'd come to defeat Jordal, to get his blessing and recommendation to the Ark, but with his expert touch, he was the one who was defeating her resolve. His other hand snaked around her hip, cupped and squeezed her ass. The flat blade side of his hand glided down the crack of her backside, causing her to shiver, moan, and clench all at once. No one had ever touched her there. No one had ever touched her anywhere. Only her own hands had explored her private parts. Nora knew she was a beautiful maiden, and that someday she would have to pleasure a man, a warrior man. So she'd touched herself countless times in an effort to prepare. At least that's what she told herself to justify her need for orgasm. She'd been pleasuring herself for a number of years now, a lustful, sinful habit her body had adapted an addiction for. It was a sin. Yes. A sin she'd asked forgiveness for quite often. Even if she were frigid, she'd have wisdom enough to know her body well. For in the presence of a seemingly unwinnable battle, she could always draw on her beauty and sexuality. Jordal's fingers were rapidly slipping in and out of her sex. Abruptly, he yanked his fingers away and twisted her to, once again, face the wall. She glanced over her shoulder as an already shirtless Jordal stepped out of black spandex trunks, and she beheld his erection. It was the first penis she'd ever seen, and while she'd always thought seeing one wouldn't be a great deal, and that it might even be unsavory, she couldn't help now but feel a yearning inside that burned to touch that beautiful piece of flesh. Firm hands grabbed her hips as he pressed forward. The tip of his large erection brushed against her inner thigh. Nora still faced the wall, her face inches from the stone.
I'm a virgin.
Not for long.
The tip of his penis kissed her wet, burning slit. More of her girl juices dribbled and glazed her inner legs.
I won't be gentle.
Of course you won't.
He pulled her back a few feet and bent her at the waist. With her palms on the wall, he gripped her hips and thrust. Her eyes went wide, mouth agape, as Nora's insides were being filled. Invaded. So tight. Jordal stilled as her body struggled to accommodate him. His arms wrapped around her, hands cupping her breasts. And suddenly he was moving, pushing deeper, pounding, ramming, thrusting, over and over, and over. Her virginal muscles stretched to accommodate this strange sensation, a strange yet wonderful possession of her body, a transcension of maturity. If this warrior could see her, fuck her like the woman she knew herself to be, then could he not admit the potential of her servitude as a warrior for their god? When the tip struck the deepest parts of her, she convulsed in ecstasy. Jordal continued ramming, riding out the erotic pulses of her orgasm. Suddenly, he pulled from her sex. With a wide grin, he lifted her and tossed her to the bed. Jordal knelt between her thighs. He wrapped a hand under each of her heels and set a foot on each of his broad shoulders. With no preempt, he entered her tightness. Quick, hard thrusts caused her entire body to rock and the bed to rattle. Nora gripped the silk sheeting beneath her. She held on tight, bracing her body for the rhythmic beats into her sex. Her wet, inviting sex. Then she felt it. The tingle. The roll of erotic pleasure building inside her womb. Again. Without a conscious thought, her ass lifted, back arched so she could take him, all of him, at just the right angle. Building. Boiling. As her orgasm possessed her body, her extremities stiffened like boards. Her breath hitched in her throat, heart hammering inside her chest. Pulse. Pulse. After erotic pulse. So much better than pleasuring herself was this giant of a man. All male. Making her feel alive. Feel like a woman. Suddenly he pulled from her. He gripped his slick shaft at the base just as cream shot from the tip, streaming across her neck. In a hypnotic, drug-like haze of eroticism, Nora used both hands and smeared his seed over, under, and around her breasts and nipples. He bent down and kissed her. Nora wrapped her arms around him, clutching his ass. pulling his stiff cock into her once again. His weight collapsed onto her. For a time, they remained together in the afterglow as the scent of their sex and sweat perfumed the chamber.
Otto.
His hips began to circle as he pushed all the way inside, as far as she'd take him. A slow, grinding motion. Nora matched each of his thrusts with her own subtle gyration.
Otto is the man.
He lifted his upper body and stabbed inside of her.
You must seek.
Ramming into her, quick and brutal jerks.
For entry into my circle.
In the darkness, Nora smiled.